Recording in progress.
صباح الخير. Esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute pleasure to have you all at the Institute of Planning for an exceptional event under the patronage of Her Excellency Dr. Hala Saeed and His Excellency Dr. Ashraf Al-Arabi. I'm Mona Assam, Head of Sustainable Development Unit at the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development, and will have the honor of moderating today's panel discussion. I would like to start by welcoming and introducing our panelists. We have with us Her Excellency Dr. Saeed, Minister of Planning and Economic Development, Her Excellency Dr. Yasmin Fouad, Minister of Environment, His Excellency of the Institute of National Planning, and our keynote speaker, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, best-selling author and director of the Center for Looking forward to a very fruitful discussion. Therefore, I will not waste much of your time, and I will start by inviting our first speaker, Dr. Ashraf Al-Arabi, President of the Institute of National Planning.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صباح الخير وكل سنة وحضراتكم جميعا بخير ورمضان كريم. دكتور هالة سعيد, the Minister of Planning and Economic Development and Chairman Dr. Mahmoud Bahruddin, the Executive Director at IMF and UN Special Envoy on Financing the 2030. Your Excellency, Dr. Yasmin Fouad, the Minister of Environment, our dear guest speaker, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, the Director of the Center of Sustainable Development at Columbia University, dear Excellencies, Professors and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's a great honor to welcome everyone joining us today in this special event. I feel delighted to be the president of the INP, the institute that was established in 1960 to be the first independent think tank in the area, Arab region and the Middle East and Africa, with more than 120 academic staff from different fields. INP is a multidisciplinary think tank that provides technical support to the government, the private sector, and the NGOs through its scientific activities that include training, research, and community services. INP has 8 academic centers covering different fields of planning and development. These include macroeconomic policies, international economic relations, environmental planning, agriculture planning, industrial planning, social and cultural planning, regional development, and planning techniques. INP has 2 postgraduate educational programs, a master's program on planning, and a professional master's program partnership with Professor Sachs and the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia to benefit from their experiences in these areas and to ensure our educational programs. Over the years, INP Sorry about that. Over the years, INP has built strong partnerships with several World Bank, UNDP, UNEP, UNICA, FAO, ILO, KDI, Development Bank, Arab Planning Institute, and lately with the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis, IASA, which resulted in the establishment for Applied Systems Analysis in Egypt, which is headed by the Vice President of the INP, Dr. Aman al-Rais. INP played a role with aligned and since energy, digital economy, and climate change. Dear Excellencies, colleagues, and guests, not only do I have the pleasure to welcome you at INP, but also I am honored to welcome you at this hall in specific. This hall is named after our godfather, Professor Ibrahim Helmi Abdul Rahman, who was the founder and first director of INP from 1960 to 1963. Professor Abdul Rahman has over than 170 papers and articles in different fields and about 174 studies and lectures in both English and Arabic languages. He is one of the founders of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the Egyptian National Research Center, and the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, in which he was appointed as its first executive director from 1966 to 1974. Before I conclude, I would like to express my deep gratitude to Her Excellency Dr. Hala Saeed for giving the INP the honor to host such an important event. I also would like to end my welcome statement with one of the famous quotes by Professor Jeffrey Sachs. He says, and I quote, "We need to defend the interests of those whom we have never met and never will." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ashraf, for a very comprehensive overview of the INP, which has always been a supportive educational institution and a think tank that is very well known to all. قبل بس ما ننقل الكلمة، هو في ترجمة متاحة عشان لو حد محتاج سماعات للترجمة. There's translation available if anybody needs translation. And now I would like to welcome Her Excellency Dr. Yasmin Fouad and the floor is yours.
شكرا. صباح الخير وكل سنة وانتم طيبين. Thank you very much, my dear friend and Minister Hala Saeed, for inviting me to be among this distinguished panel. Muhiddin, COP27 climate champion and executive director. Dr. Ashraf Al-Arabi, thank you, and Professor Jeffrey Sachs. I don't have a specific to shed 3 points maybe on how Egypt within its transformative shift is collectively working on the inclusion of the environment sustainability in its work. At the policy level, striving very hard to create a whole new enabling environment that would ensure sustaining the natural resources and its efficient management, working on vast development process. And this is, as you know, Professor Sachs, is the challenge always with the sustainability. We have started on reviewing once again the that, and how can we change the whole environment sector? And I mean sector, not the ministry, because then when dealing with the environment, you need a multi-stakeholder process and approach by involving more line ministers into that process. I'll give one quick example on that. We started by developing the waste management law, our first waste management law that is based on a circular economy review for the decrees that relates to enabling more the private sector. But the most important thing within our process of building back better, that maybe my colleague also Hala will give details on it, is greening our own national budget. Within the Build Back Better, we've set for ourselves environmental sustainability criteria for our national projects that could reach 100% to be green projects by 2020. And by that, we mean that we did not other. We also try to do if we talk about the banking sector in Egypt, can there be to stress the differentiation mix between both. Not every green project is a project, and how can we involve to increase all? It's not the private sector, it's the government, the private sector, the government, the civil society, and the public citizen, and that's why we start the species of the government, which is called Live Green, trying to give different messages and engaging more the stakeholders. When we come to an issue like climate change, only a couple of the Ministry of Environment, the Council for Climate Change, first national climate change, but the consultation, it does not talks about the whole environment at the national level. So it has a component on the governance, on the climate governance roles and responsibility. It has the architecture of the climate finance. How can you deal with that at the national level, and where are the bottlenecks? And it has a fourth one related to research and technology, beside mitigation and adaptation and different programs. This is in a nutshell what I wanted just to mention, how we were thinking of creating a robust development process for its citizen, challenges, and trying to build back a way that would be seen for everyone to have a stake in that process. And definitely during the Q&A, I can give more examples. Thank you.
On the overall transformative that is adopted by the government of Egypt and the Ministry of Environment in the domain of environment. And now I would like to give the word to Her Excellency, Minister of Planning and Economic Development.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صباح الخير، وبرحب بكل الحضور من الأساتذة والقامات الكبيرة الموجودة في القاعة. رمضان كريم، كل سنة وحضراتكم طيبين. اسمحوا لي ان انا هنقل الى اللغة الإنجليزية، وعشان يعني البانل والضيف اللي بيشرفنا النهارده. Distinguished guests, أنا بس المسؤولين عن الأونلاين إنه يخلوا كل الناس ميوت باي ديفولت، يبقوا كلهم ميوت. أنا مش عارفة الناس إزاي بتدخل على الأونلاين بلاتفورم. يقفلوا ميوت ويقفلوا الكاميرا. مظبوط. First, I wish you all a blessed month of Ramadan. It's my pleasure to be here at the Institute of National Planning. It's always an honor. I'm honored to be the chair of the board of this prestigious think tank. I'm also delighted to share a panel today with esteemed figures, Dr. Yasmin Fouad, my colleague and friend, Professor Dr. Ashraf Al-Arabi, Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin, and of course, our guest, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who we warmly welcome him back to Egypt. I think the last visit was more than 10 years. So we welcome you more back to Egypt today. Today's panel discussion is actually a unique opportunity. We need to enhance dialogue between prominent figures during a time where the world witnessed considerable development on various fronts. We have passed through the COVID-19 pandemic, moving to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, the far-reaching and multifaceted implication of such major crises have significantly undermined lives and livelihoods. Economies and societies struggle. The global economies face rising inflation, increasing poverty, disruption in supply chains, and of course, reduced economic activity. This is not to mention the challenges induced by the climate change as planetary boundaries are being pushed beyond the limits. Yes, we must acknowledge that while adversities are inevitable, they are not everlasting, and in fact breed vast opportunities to unleash our potential and become more resilient. In Egypt, we believe that in light of these developments, it has become more important than ever to accelerate the momentum towards the implementation of the 2030 agenda. We have embarked, and we were just discussing with Professor Sachs a few minutes ago, the update of Egypt's Vision 2030. In order to align this updated vision with all the global developments that happened. We have passed through a lot of local and international developments, coming from the economic reform program that started in 2016 to the COVID-19 pandemic, to the Russian and the Ukrainian conflict. All this necessitates the need to update the Vision 2030, and of course, with all the pressing challenges that we are all facing. We have also launched Egypt's voluntary national review. We are regularly having our voluntary national review and presenting these national reviews to the high-level political forum. Last July, it was our third voluntary national review, and this stresses Egypt's commitment to evaluate our progress and share our experience with the international community. Egypt is one of 10 countries worldwide that have issued its third voluntary national review. Also, Egypt has recently launched its Human Development Report since more than a decade for the first time, as well as publishing its first Finance for Development report, being the first country in the world to embark on such a project at the national level. And I thank my colleague, Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin, for leading the effort with the Arab League, with the Arab States League. Moreover, in order to build the gains of the first phase of the reform program and to cement the gains of the first phase of the reform and stabilize the economy and make it more resilient, the government have pursued its second phase of economic reform program, which we called the National Structural Reform Program, that was launched and was announced by His Excellency, the Prime Minister, in April 2021. The focus of this National Structural Reform Program main aim is to raise the productive capacity and the competitiveness of the economy and enhance its resilience to shocks. It has different pillars. Its key pillars revolve around improving the business environment, expanding the weight of the real side of the economy, basically the manufacturing, the ICT, and the agriculture sectors in the economy, in addition to promote and enhance the effectiveness of the labor market. This efficiency is in the labor market in Egypt, so enhancing the efficiency of our labor market in Egypt revamping the education system, moving more towards technical and vocational education with accreditation and certification standards, and of course achieving financial inclusion, enhancing the efficiency of public institutions. Furthermore, we had two mega projects during the past 2 years that are currently underway. One of them is the Decent Life Initiative, and the second is the Family Development Project. The Decent Life Initiative, its main aim is to enhance the quality of life of more than half of the population of Egypt, focusing on the rural side of our society. We are targeting for more than 4,500 villages, 8 million population, introducing and enhancing the quality of life of sanitation, water, electricity, roads, medical units and hospitals, education, enhancing the number of classrooms and decreasing the density of students in the class. In addition, of course, to promoting more decent jobs for our people. The other important project is the Family Development Projects, and I'm happy to have my colleagues on the advisory council of this project here, Dr. Heba and Dr. Hania. This project's main aim is to limit the birth control, but yet at the same time enhance and invest in the characteristics of people. We need to have a population that is well educated, well fed, having proper medical services, and being more productive to our economy. To add, we are also working diligently to expedite the green transformation, of course, led by my colleague, Dr. Yasmin Fouad, as we are heading towards the COP27 that will be hosted, God willing, in Sharm el-Sheikh later this year. The government is committed to promote various projects and policy frameworks focusing on transition to renewable energy, clean mobility, encouraging private investment in green sectors, and achieving water and food security. Today's panel, featuring notable figures, is a great chance to discuss Egypt's experience and further enrich it as we weather the challenges and strive to build resilient and ultimately achieve sustainable and inclusive development. That said, it's a privilege to have with us today Professor Jeffrey Sachs as our keynote speaker. He will share with us his valuable insights and experiences with respect to addressing the most complex challenges, including eradicating poverty, combating climate change, circumventing financial setbacks, and most importantly, building economic resilience. Professor Sachs is an eminent economics professor and director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, in addition to being the president of the UN Sustainable Development Solution Network. He's the former director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University, which has become a global pioneer in applying scientific and practical knowledge to protect the environment and achieve global sustainability. Having authored several best-selling books, notably The End of Poverty, The Price of Civilization, Professor Sachs has substantially contributed not only to the literature on sustainable development, but also to the world's diligent endeavor towards achieving the SDGs. In recognition of his efforts, he was the co-recipient of the 2015 Blue Planet Prize, which is the leading global prize for environmental leadership, and was twice named among Times Magazine 100 Most Influential World Leaders. We are thrilled to have him with us today, and we are very much looking forward to listening to his valuable insights. Without further ado, and before I give the floor, I'd like to give the floor to Professor Sachs. Please, your floor is yours.
Your Excellencies, Dr. Al-Ashri, Mahmoud, my dear colleague, and ladies and gentlemen, and many, many friends, it's a great honor and pleasure to be together with you. The hospitality of Egypt, of course, is legendary, but we feel it very deeply. And the warm greeting that we've had, both my wife Sonia and myself, were so grateful. And we're very happy to be here in the beginning of Ramadan, also this very special season, and all of that deep meaning we greatly appreciate. So let me thank you extremely for the honor and for the pleasure of being with you. Egypt also has a major global responsibility this year with COP27, and I hope that in any way I can be helpful with Mahmoud. We're working together on many things day by day, week by week in New York, in Washington, and other parts of the world. And it's a great pleasure for me to help in any possible way for the great success of this meeting, which is so important for the world and so appropriate that Egypt is leading this effort. And I know how we're all hoping that when we come together at the end of the year, there can be some tremendous breakthroughs. Well, because Egypt has so much capacity, we're challenging every day, making the world even more difficult, unfortunately, to overcome this. This is the most complicated moment in the world in recent memory, to be sure. More dislocation now in the short term than we've had in decades because of the pandemic followed by a war. So I don't envy your challenge at this moment, but I want to speak about how to navigate this period and how to think about the period that we're in. I think that the shocks that we're facing are part of a deeper shift in the world taking place in many complicated ways, and that the crucial point for navigating this world is to understand the longer term challenges and the longer term trends, and then to maneuver in the short term in this very complicated time with the longer term in mind. And that's why I so much appreciate the government's commitment for a longer term vision and working very much on planning, which I think is crucial, absolutely essential to navigate this period. I count 5 big themes to keep in mind, 5 big changes in the world, any one of which would be a big challenge, but we have 5 interacting changes that are taking place together. The technological revolution is very deep, and it is a fundamental driver of change, especially the digital revolution. But the digital revolution is a revolution in every scientific domain as well. So we have a biotechnology revolution. We have, of course, an electronics revolution. We have an artificial intelligence revolution. You open a science journal, it's absolutely breathtaking, the changes that are taking place week to week, month to month right now. It's an acceleration of technological change. So that's number one. That by itself would cause tumult, and we need to understand it. But the most important single point is knowledge economy, to be able to master it, to be able to benefit from it, not to be left behind in 20th century technologies or 19th century technologies in a world in which the technological change is soaring. Second, related, is the environmental crisis. This is well beyond climate change alone. It's multiple crises. And it was actually very well predicted 50 years ago by the first book that I read as a first-year university student, written 50 years ago, Limits to Growth, which was the first time that there was an attempt to model the 100-year dynamic of the planet in an interconnected economic and environmental system. When I read it, it talked about how we would have an overshooting of nature and a collapse. And I can tell you, my professor in 1972 said, don't worry. I was a student at Harvard. She said, look, it was written by those people at MIT. They don't understand economics. They're just engineers. But you know what? The engineers got it right. And we're really at the cusp of a profound environmental crisis. And the economists got it wrong. Because the economists said, it'll sort itself out. Scarcity, prices will go up, will shift. That could happen. But my God, we're playing it so close to the edge because we already are at 1.2 degrees Celsius warming. There has never been this warm an Earth during the entire period of civilization. And saying that in Egypt is saying a lot because you define the beginning of civilization. And it's never been this warm during the last 10,000 years. And the warming is now faster than 0.3 degrees Celsius per decade. We're going to overshoot the 1.5 degrees. It's almost inevitable, maybe in the next 5 years, maybe in 10 years, in a bad El Nino year. Droughts, floods, storms, rising sea levels, new pathogens, pest outbreaks, all of it is already forest fires of huge magnitude. And then you add in the other environmental crises, pollution, air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution, plastics pollution, ocean pollution. It's everywhere. Then you add in the collapse of ecosystems, which are at tipping points. Rainforests can become open savanna grasslands because they're drying. And I'm helping in a project in the Amazon, which has found, and a recent paper just 2 weeks ago published said the same thing, close to a tipping point, shifting from being a carbon sink, drawing carbon from the atmosphere, to a carbon source, releasing carbon into the atmosphere, already happening in the southern part of the Amazon basin. So we're in the midst of huge environmental crisis, number 2. Number 3 is huge geopolitical change. We're moving to a multipolar world. Unipolar worlds are rare, unusual, against nature. It's not normal to have one country dominant in world history. Usually it happens because a technological breakthrough comes and that gives a temporary advantage. Why did Britain become dominant? Why are we speaking English right now? Mainly because James Watt invented the steam engine in Glasgow University, because that created the industrial age. The industrial age created the industrial army. The industrial army and the industrial navy created the British Empire. The British Empire gave a lot of ideas to the American Empire. I come from a country that believes it rules the world. It's a little out of date. It's very confused, unfortunately. You can't rule the world if you also elect presidents like Donald Trump, by the way. If you're going for crazy, you're crazy. We're crazy. So believe me, we're a little crazy. So unipolarity is an accident that's temporary. Look at Britain today. It's a nice island that maybe will hold together, or maybe will become 3 countries again. But it's not ruling the world. It still has memories, but it has no geopolitical power, though it has some nuclear weapons. And this is the true fact of geopolitics. I don't have to say this here. How many dynasties did you have? And how much have you seen history come and go and rulers come and go? We're in the midst of change. China is a rising power. I happen to like that because China's a great civilization. It's one of the world's greatest civilizations. It's got a huge amount to offer to the world, but it's viewed as the worst possible thing for the United States because they never went to China. There's no human connection. If you've been to China, like my wife and I have 100 times, and so many students and friends and so forth, it's a wonderful thing, China's success, not a terrible thing, but we view it as a terrible thing because we're also extremely tribal in outlook, probably genetically made that way, evolutionarily made that way. But we're in the midst of big geopolitics. The war in Ukraine is a geopolitical war. It's not actually, in my opinion, a war between Russia and Ukraine. It's a war between Russia and the United States. Stupid, because the US wanted to move NATO into Ukraine. Russia said, no, don't move your military alliance to our border. And the United States says, why not? And I tried to remind my American friends that when Cuba said, yeah, well, we invaded Cuba within 6 months, when they said it's our right to side with the Soviet Union. That was the invasion in the spring of 1961. It almost led to the end of the world the next year in the Cuban Missile Crisis. But Americans cannot see anything from the side of the other perspective, I'm afraid. That's what happens with arrogance. And so we're in the middle of a geopolitical conflict right now. Dangerous, but I still hope it can be solved. What President Zelensky said last week, we will be neutral, is the key to peace. The United States immediately said, oh, we don't believe in negotiations. They're trying not to negotiate a peace. But if we can negotiate a peace with a neutral Ukraine, this war could be over quickly. So just to say the geopolitical change is the third huge change, we should want a multipolar world. We should want it, desire it. It's more stable. It's more interesting. It's more we learn from each other. It's better to celebrate each other's cultures. It's more fun. The food is better. We'll enjoy each other more. It'll be a peaceful world. American fast food dominating the world's not a great idea. So this is the third point. Fourth point is regional integration. The problems that we face are inherently regional at scale. Nothing can be solved at a national scale. This is the whole history of humanity and technology. The scale of the challenge keeps growing. So the most vital resource for Egypt is your children. The second most vital resource for Egypt is the Nile. You can't manage the Nile other than regionally. And the problem of the dam upstream is a huge problem. It needs regional cooperation. It's a fundamental problem. And so there's so many like this all over the world that cannot be solved nationally. Another issue, Egypt should be exporting solar energy. Not only producing it, which would be a first good idea, but exporting it. And you have the Africa-Europe interconnector project. This is a fantastic project. It means that Egypt's energy system can only be reformed in a regional Eastern Mediterranean strategy. It can't be done in conflict. It needs to be done in partnership. I'm very happy, by the way, if it works, and I'm not up to date on the latest, but if Egypt, Cyprus, and Greece coordinate on this Europe-Africa or Africa-Europe interconnector, this is a wonderful project of 3 countries that understand regional politics well and can cooperate together well. So this is the 4th point. 5th point is, I believe the future of global politics is inter-regional politics. We have 193 countries in the UN. So if you do bilateral relations, that's 193 times 192 over 2 combinations. I don't know what that is. 40,000. It's about 20,000 bilateral combinations. Too much. But if we have regional cooperation, the AU, the EU, ASEAN, China, Mercosur, a few big regional entities, it's maybe 10. And then that's 45 bilateral combinations rather than 20,000. In other words, region to region is very fruitful. There should be, if I may say, a strong Arab region. It's an old idea. The United States absolutely hated it. It's important that and Egypt invented the idea and should go back to actually create a strong MENA region or Arab region. The AU is very important also, and it's improving the African Union. It's actually gaining institutional weight, and it's gaining a common sense of common market and open skies and so on. And Egypt can do a lot of business in Africa also, so even economically, this is extremely important. But I think the EU and the AU should be cooperating as regional entities and so on. So I think this interregional politics rather than international, nation to nation, makes a lot of sense and is the direction that we ought to go. There are a few giants. India actually should integrate through South Asia, but India is big enough, 1.4 billion, that having India as a separate pole or China is almost inevitable in some part. But you know, a big part of the problem is that American primacy, like British primacy, was based on divide and conquer. So the idea of the US is don't allow strong alliances regionally. That's a threat. When Nasser wanted it, that was a no-no. In East Asia, you got to keep Japan and Korea on one side, China on the other side. Not what should be normal unity, because they're neighbors with each other. Neighbors need to cooperate because they share common riversheds, they share airspace, they pollute each other, they endanger each other, they trade with each other. So if you're not getting along with your neighbor, it just absolutely cheats economic development and cheats well-being and creates a huge amount of friction and a huge waste of resources. So just to say, the world's in deep change and one has to navigate in this way. When I think about this from Egypt's point of view, pardon me for, I hope, not being wildly naive and out of step, but the following things come to mind for me. First, the knowledge economy. This is essential. This is really the key. Egypt is going to be overwhelmingly a service-based society. All advanced economies are anyway. But then to prosper in a service-based economy is knowledge, it's skills, it's training, it's thinking. So I would put as the highest priority the education system, making sure that every child at least at a minimum finishes secondary school, every girl as well as every boy, but then that there's a chance for professional training or vocational training in some way, special skills. I would think about adult education for people that didn't have a great education, but are 30 years old, they're in the labor market and they want to upskill. And now you can do that online. So there can be certificate programs to upskill learning, a certificate in sustainable development, a certificate in renewable energy, a certificate in public health, in many, many areas that are needed. And I would really advocate a knowledge-based economy at the core. I'd aim to get the national investment in research and development at least between 1% and 2% of GDP. If you look at why Korea or other East Asian countries are where they are, they're investing like crazy in innovation. Usually Korea's more than 4% of GDP investment in R&D, maybe half and half government, private sector. So I would put the knowledge economy first. As part of that, I would put gender equality as crucial, because right now the labor force is 3/4 men, 1/4 women, and the women are only 25% in the workforce. And now that's too little, because there's lots of brain power, there's lots of capacity, and there is, by the way, they're in the workforce at home unpaid. They can be in the workforce and paid also, and with increased skills. And by the way, also more work from home because of the digital economy. And so there are ways to do things now in high quality work, highly remunerated work that are new and very interesting. And I think it feeds into the government's population policy as well, which is that if girls are getting a full education and entering the workforce, fertility rates will come down. Fertility rates are still 3.3 total fertility rate in Egypt. This is very high. And if you look at the UN projections of population, there's a wide band depending on what happens to fertility. So population is young in Egypt, there's bound to be population growth. But if you look at the low, medium, and high fertility scenarios of the UN Population Division, by 2100 in the low scenario, where there's a real demographic transition, Egypt's population is about 150 million. If you look at the medium, it's 200 million. If you look at the high, it's between 250 and 300 million. Unmanageable, by the way, in climate change, water stress, the Nile flow being reduced. It would be really, really tough. So speeding the fertility transition, I think, is strategic. I'm glad that the government sees it very clearly that way. And the single obvious, most important way to do that is skills for women and work for women, remunerated work. And by the way, if culturally some don't want to work outside, now you can work from home in all sorts of jobs in ways that also facilitate this. So to my mind, this is the first part. Second is, I won't belabor the point except to say you've got a lot of sunshine in this country and you're not using it properly yet. And solar power has really come down in price, and Egypt should power itself overwhelmingly with solar power and storage. And it's not only feasible, it's the right option. And Egypt can export solar energy. And that requires submarine cables, high voltage direct current to Europe. And this should be a priority. So this is the second point that I would emphasize. The key to the green economy is getting low-cost capital, because investing in solar is capital intensive. The big problem with renewable energy is that you pay everything up front. You don't pay fuel down the road, but you pay the capital costs up front. And the capital costs for renewable are higher than the capital costs for fossil fuel. But the lifetime is lower if the interest rates are low enough. So the change we need globally is low interest rates for green investment. This is the most important single change for the global transformation. Egypt needs it, the whole world needs it. It should feature centrally at COP27, which is, don't lecture us, we know, but you finance this. The world financial system is broken. I'll tell you why. I'll give you specific numbers. Last September, Egypt issued a Eurobond, 3 tranches, 6-year, 12-year, and 30-year. When you borrowed, the 6-year bond was 5.8% coupon, the 12-year was 7.3% coupon, and the 30-year was 8.75% coupon. You know what the US Treasury borrowed at that same day? 1% for the 6-year, as opposed to 5.8%. Yours is dollar bond, so it's the same currency. You paid 5.8%, the US Treasury paid 1%. For the 12-year, 7.3%, yours, the US Treasury paid 1.9%. For the 30-year, you paid 8.75%, the Treasury paid 2.0%. Come on, that's a rigged system. So I would say to the US one of two things. Either you give us the printing press for the dollar, thank you. That's a good idea. Or you work with us to change the financing so that we're also getting 2%. We need the capital more than you do. And that's what Mahmoud and I are charged with coming up with by the Secretary General of the UN. We just have to convince the US government and a couple of others. But truly, this is the biggest challenge for green development, is show us the money on terms we can afford. And that is not Euro bonds at 8.75% interest. So this is the challenge that I would say of the greening part of the economy. Of course, the SDGs provide a whole framework for this, and the government is very, very well aligned with the SDGs. Next year, there will be an SDG summit, and there will be another set of goals after 2030, be sure, up to the year 2050. And they will be sustainable development goals in some sense. And this is the trajectory that is really needed. I guess the final word that I would say about COP27 and Egypt's leadership. The one, I know that the government has said we don't want just more words, we want action and implementation. COP for implementation. This is wonderful. I want to help on this. All the time, I've been to, I don't know how many COPs. Not all of them, but many of them. A lot of them. They're very nice. They're diplomats talking with each other. I like diplomats a lot, by the way. Very civilized people. They know how to talk with each other. And by the way, that is a skill of a tiny fraction of humanity, to not yell at each other. I wish someday the United States has diplomats, actually. That would be nice, that they don't lecture to other people, but they talk to other people. So this, I think, would be a very good thing. But the COPs need more than diplomats. They need engineers. They need actually people who know what an energy system is. Not just who know what the words are, but actually can help design an energy system. So one thing I wanted to propose, for the Secretary General, I've launched this year with UNIDO, and I'm co-chairing with the Director General of UNIDO, a Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition. We're selecting them just now, 50 world engineers in every sector, in hydrogen, in batteries, in solar, in long distance transmission, everything. I'd like to bring this council here this fall. It could be at the COP, it could be before the COP, but to highlight this is an engineer's problem too. And there are solutions, and it's practical, and every government needs to engage its engineers and needs to engage the worldwide community to know where are you going to invest to get this done. Not just the pledge, but the actual engineering. And then we need to engineer the financing alongside it. Basically, low interest rate, 30-year finance is the key. But we can bring engineers here for a major first ever gathering of global engineers for the energy transition, featured for COP27, because this is what we should be doing, to say practical, get with it, get organized, here's where you need to invest, and how we can build the system. So let me mention one more point. I love the Haya Karima program, so congratulations. Now, I looked it up just to understand the translation, because it's translated as decent life. But it said in my dictionary that Karima also means generous. I love that translation even more, because generosity is the key for survival. So at the core of this, we need the values. We need the human values. Decent life means, okay, I have a decent life. Generous life is, I want you to have a decent life. That's even more important. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Professor Sachs, for an insightful word. It's really pleasuring and enlightening word, shedding light on the 5 big themes of youth changes the world is facing, and your reflection on how Egypt should cope with these in its path towards achieving sustainable development. And I'm sure a lot of our guests at the floor would like to make interventions, but allow me first to invite Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin, the Special Envoy for Financing the 2030 Agenda and the Climate Champion for COP27, to give his word. And let us enjoy your word as usual, Dr. Mahmoud. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سعيد بوجودي هنا، وأود أن أتقدم للقائد الجديد للمعهد مديره الدكتور أشرف. Yeah, perhaps I may speak in English, so that may work. Yeah. So what I was trying to say, that starting by congratulating my good friend and colleague, His Excellency Dr. Ashraf Al-Arabi, for the leadership of the institute, and to continue the great journey of the scholars, including many of them who are here today, the distinguished Professor Dr. Ibrahim Al-Asawi. Great deal of respect to you, sir. And of course, the other professors and scholars who taught us a lot. Excellency Dr. Hala Saeed, Excellency Dr. Yasmin Fouad, our distinguished guest and professor. I've been learning a lot from you, Professor Sachs, since I met you first time, and even before that, when I was doing my master's degree and my PhD. But before this gathering today, I had a copy of my book, his book. It's my book. I bought it. That was in 1996, and he signed it to me when he was visiting Egypt. And my students in the room. I see some of them at the same book that I used in teaching macroeconomics for the undergraduate and the postgraduate classes then. And I got another signature, so I think the value, in addition to the scholarly value of the book, but having two signatures of Professor Sachs could be monetized in a way to help and contribute to the Haya Karim and other project that you do. But not now, not now. I'm grateful as well that you got us through many issues that we need really to put an emphasis on. But before getting into that, while I'm very pleased to be in the room and connected as well to friends and colleagues online, I'm very happy that my daughter is not here, because you praised engineers twice. And she dropped economics voluntarily to be an engineer. She graduated from Dartmouth College, and saying something similar to what you said, Professor, about the comparative advantage of engineers in some areas of work. But let me be practical, perhaps learning from her something, is basically on your proposal, of course, in the presence of the two ministers, we can add to that, but basically from my side, as a coordinator of the non-state actors, I think your idea of bringing the engineers in your initiative with UNIDO is more than welcome. At least from my side, we'll take care of that. But of course, in the presence of Her Excellency Dr. Yasmin Fouad, the coordinator of the efforts and the envoy on the formal side. And you met yesterday as well, His Excellency Minister Sameh Shukri, with the president of the COP. And all of us really under this good guidance. And of course, Minister Hala is a member of the National Committee that is helping us to have this COP27 as a success. All of us are under very strict guidance to make this COP not a COP of pledges and claims and promises, but on delivery. Woe it for our people here in Egypt. Woe it for the Africans who trusted us to be the hosts for this summit. And we owe it to the whole world that have been really hearing great things about how much a CEO loves planet more than anything else, how much a government is pledging to provide finance for the developing economies or to contribute to different efforts. But then what is really left in reality is leaving a lot to be desired. And I'll come back to this point because what you mentioned is reminding us of another aspect of the Egyptian COP, and I'll try to focus on my intervention on the relevance of what you said, which is really, I think many colleagues have been taking notes and they will be asking you many questions, but I'll try to make my intervention focus more on the COP side and on the finance side. So the first one on the COP was basically this practical approach that we're focusing on delivery and on the implementation rather than trying to make our editors of the top financial papers happy that we are adding more pledges and more claims. And then the other aspect is this holistic approach that you reminded us with, that it is not really proper or scientific to talk about climate in isolation of everything else that happens. And that's why in practice, many countries failed in managing the transition, including many advanced economies. For us, a developing economy, an emerging market economy, a middle-income country economy, for us, the solution you contributed with your colleagues since you're working on the MDGs and then the SDGs, that the holistic approach to development and progress. You cannot talk about climate and add more people to extreme poverty. You cannot really have action on climate and cause more unemployment without